Well, hello and welcome back to this episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast. Today I've got a special guest, Lauren Sisler. She's an award-winning broadcaster, sportscaster on ESPN, the SEC network, and is also well known as a speaker. And Lauren has some very interesting topics to cover, especially as it relates to the stigma that a lot of people carry related to secrets that they carry. And it's connected to her own personal story. Lauren, in all the years, first of all, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining us. In all the episodes we've done, and all the years I've done this, there's been very few stories that I've learned about from my guests that are really as touching as your story. And I'm really excited to talk with you about how your experience as a professional broadcaster helps amplify the message that you have. And I think it's a really, really important one. Let's quickly jump in to where you're at and what got you started on this journey. You have an incredibly difficult challenge that you've worked through in your life.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Cords. I appreciate it and just appreciate this opportunity to be part of your platform, which I think is sort of where we start, right? You mentioned just sort of my career and, being a broadcaster, right? And so my job for a living is to communicate with other people. And, while obviously sports is my passion, I love covering sports as a former athlete myself, a former gymnast. I was around sports my entire life. My brother was a 3-sport athlete. You could always find my parents on the sidelines, volunteer coaching, always part of those athletics. And, I was always running around on the sidelines, watching my brother swinging on the monkey bars, you name it, whatever, that has sort of led me and transcended into this career as a sports broadcaster. And I will tell you the number one thing that has led me to share my story kind of early on and where I'm at now is sharing other people's stories. So it's all come full circle. And really as a broadcaster, when you turn on the TV, when you watch a game, right, you may have a team that you're rooting for, you're pulling for, you're excited. I'm going to watch this game because my blank, we'll keep it unbiased here, right? We won't pick any specific teams out. But I'm watching this particular team because I'm excited. Well, sometimes you turn on the TV, especially in bowl season, we'll use college football, when you don't have a dog in the fight, but you're turning on because you love college football. Well, my job as a reporter is to bring the game to you right in your living room or your man cave or wherever it is you're watching this game, and to give you a rooting interest. I want to share stories. I want to be able to share with you what is between the lines, between the hash marks. We're not talking about the X's and O's specifically. We're talking about the stories. What makes a team unique and special? What makes a player unique and special? So when you flip on that TV and you hear the broadcast, this player overcame this, he was, living in this situation, in this condition, or lost a family member, and he had to overcome this tragedy. And now here he is. And the impact that can have on other people is resounding, and it's residual. And it was something that through my career as a broadcaster, it started out, I'm cool. Like, I'm on TV. I get paid to talk about sports. Like, this is so awesome. And, the confetti is showering down at the national championship. We're crowning a national champion, and I get to be here in this moment with all these athletes, players, coaches, fans, in celebrating in this moment. That was the thought coming in. But as I started sharing stories and seeing the value and the power of story, I then realized, Cords, that I have a story, and my story too can have an impact on others. And that's where I've landed on this revelation that it is so important for us to use our platform and our voice to empower others to also share their stories and the value that can have to impact someone else's life in a positive way.
Well, Lauren, we actually work with some organizations that focus on some of those pieces where in stories similar to yours. And so because we're focused on it here at our agency for our client, it's so obvious to me that you have a story. And like I was saying, like your story is pretty profound. And it's very interesting to me. Why do you think it took you telling other people's stories to come to grips with your own story and then start to using it? Because to me, it's what you've gone through is just so it's significant.
The word that I use often and that comes to me is the word shame. And I think that as you introduce this show, you talk about how we all have struggles with something in our life that might produce shame. You know, there's stigmas, there's shame surrounding choices we make, things that happen, things that don't go right, jobs that we lose, you know, our financial standing in this world,
Sure.
you know, situations that happen in our life that create, you know, heartbreak, heartache, loss, right? And then there's that piece of shame where sometimes we're afraid to step out of the shadows and share our story because we're afraid that we might be judged for that. We might be judged. If people knew my story, they might judge me and think lesser of me, and think lesser of my family. And for me, my story is something that I hold so dear to my heart. And I feel like that my story and the people that are attached to my story, their legacies are bound in my hands. And so that piece of shame is interwoven into that. And so it really, as you realize the impact of story and how your story can maybe unlock someone else's shame, that's the process that it took me to get to in realizing that, hey, you know what? We all have a story. My story matters, your story matters, and your story and my story have the ability to impact other people's lives in a positive way and perhaps set them on a different track to being free from whatever shame they might feel because of the circumstances that are in their lives.
Well, I think before we get into the nitty-gritty details of what you've experienced, I have noticed that in your interviews. When you're interviewing someone, one of the things that I've observed is you do come across as an incredibly authentic person who truly does care about the emotions behind the activities that people have gone through, whether it's Coach Saban and what he deals with. I mean, most people just think he's some kind of a machine, you know?
Right. Well, when you pump out that many national championships,
right.
Boom, 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 boom. Yeah. It's hard not to think that sometimes, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's so important that there's people like you that are so skilled at doing those interviews and getting to the person underneath all of this performance and excellence, right? Because it's a lot of times it's so unachievable when you look at some of the people that you've had the privilege of working with, right, in your career. And
yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to let you know that it's obvious with your technique and the way that you communicate with them, like how you're so effective, because it's just with what, I mean, I assume it's a lot has with you facing your own story, and that experience has really helped you connect with others.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you sharing that because, you know, the saying goes, the gift of gab, right? So the gift of gab, I often hear that when I'm at my, at the gym that I go to, that I'm the number one talker in the gym. I'm usually the last one out of there because my workouts get extended because I like to talk quite a bit, but also have been told it's a gift, right? And I appreciate you sharing that with me because I think that is part of our story, right? Finding our gifts within that. And I think we'll get to that here a little bit later on in the podcast, but, finding your gifts. What are your gifts? What are you gifted? What are some of your talents? What are some influential areas in your life that you can use to help other people, to further other people, to encourage, to elevate other people in the process? And so I do appreciate you sharing that, because I think sometimes, I kind of just dive right in, but I think being an open book sort of helps me make others feel encouraged, and maybe gives them permission to be an open book as well.
Well, let's talk about your career for just a moment. Did you always want to be a sportscaster?
Nope. And that's always interesting, because I think of people, when I think of broadcasters, and a lot of people that I'm close with that have been very successful in this business, they were essentially born with a mic in their hand, right? Like, grandpa's sitting in the recliner over here, and so-and-so is looking at the TV, calling a game, with grandpa sitting in the chair, pretending to be a broadcaster. And look, as a former gymnast, it's very much a performance-based sport. You go out there and you perform, you put on a show for the judges and obviously the audience, the crowd that's watching. So performance, I think, was always in my blood, but I actually wanted to be a sports doctor growing up. So I wanted to be a sports doctor, athletic trainer. I wanted to be in the sports world, but in my mind, as a former gymnast, lots of injuries are attached to gymnastics, unfortunately. And I wanted to use my experiences to help other athletes get back out on the playing surface, whatever it may be, and that was my thought process, is like, if I could be a sports doctor, orthopedic doctor, or a athletic trainer, I could potentially help many athletes get back onto, the field, or back on the beam, or whatever it is, and live out their dreams after an injury. And so that's really what I dreamed of from a wee little age. But of course, as we all know, we have those childhood dreams that sometimes don't always manifest the way that we would like them to. And, I think that was a childhood dream for me. But after, some events that happened to me in college, and just kind of taking a step back and recognizing, hey, you know what? I need to find something that I'm passionate about, that I love, and that I feel that I could be really good at, and use my gifts and my personality and my talents to highlight those things, right? To highlight those gifts and those talents. What career field, what industry, what path can I take to be able to highlight some of those things? And that's how I landed on sports broadcasting.
Well, so how did that process go? Because obviously you're very talented, you're articulate, obviously you're an extremely attractive lady, you're easy to look at on camera. Those are all talent. You're talking about the talents that other people have when they're born with a mic in their hand. And you clearly are a big fan of sports, right? So it seems like a perfect fit. Like, how did that audition process go? Like, is this something you studied in school?
So when I switched majors, I went from being a pre-med. So I was doing a lot of the biologies, the sciences, and I always liked science growing up. And I always thought, sciences were always, intriguing, and felt like I always performed well in science class. But kind of just took a step back. And as an athlete, I was fortunate to have a lot of resources at Rutgers, where I went to school, and kind of just took a step back. And, you do this evaluation, this really big deep dive into like figuring out what it is you're good at, these personality quizzes, you take these surveys, you figure all this stuff out, and you really just drill down on what you like, what you don't like. You have this kind of list column on each side, and you sort of just start to narrow it down. And, I think again, that process went hand in hand with sort of the things that I enjoy doing. I know you mentioned being articulate. Y'all just came out of my mouth.
Yeah, we might be from the same part of the country.
Yeah. There's things that I've had to learn and become more articulate with the way I've deliver things. But it's obviously a process, but, just kind of figuring those things out. And then eventually you get to a place where it's like, all right, I think this is it. And so having those resources at Rutgers really helped me, diving into those resources and really just figuring out what I can be good at, and then exploring different avenues, right, within that industry, figuring out like, do I want to be forward facing, and do I want to be on the camera? Do I want to be on the sidelines? Or maybe do I want to be a camera operator or a stage manager or a producer or an editor or, a director or, a manager of some sort. So obviously there's so many different facets to the broadcasting industry. And I just had to figure out what it is I wanted to do. And again, as someone that loves to communicate, I felt like this was a good opportunity, and to be able to develop relationships, not only create relationships, but develop and grow those relationships, behind the scenes, and then obviously on the field, has really just been a fun process, and, something that I really enjoy and feel like, in many ways I struck gold, and definitely pursued an avenue that I'm very grateful for it, and certainly feel ended up being a great fit.
Yeah, I agree. I just noticed that in your camera right there, you actually have a picture of where I'm from.
What? Where?
Right
Augusta?
over your right shoulder. Yeah, I was born in Augusta. I grew up about
on my wall so everyone can see it right here. See?
I grew up about half a mile from where that picture was painted.
Really?
We used to listen to the I had grandparents that moved to Augusta in the 40s, and so anyhow, this podcast isn't about me, but we
this is a conversation, Cords. Yeah, exactly. We go both ways. We're both here. Let's have a conversation. Why not?
That's a good point. But we lived right behind Amen Corner. So on the other side of the National is the Augusta Country Club, and we lived in a neighborhood that was created out of Augusta Country Club. Used to be a 36-hole golf course.
Okay.
And they deleted 18 of the holes and turned it into a neighborhood back in the 50s. And so we lived in one of those homes. And so when we would watch the tournament on TV, or, if we went to the tournament or watched the tournament on TV, we could hear the gallery, so we would open up all the windows and everything. And so it was cool, because you would hear a big roar come through the pine trees. And then on TV, you'd see moments ago on 13.
Yeah. And you'd almost get the little bit of delay, like you'd hear the roar and then you hear the roar on TV, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
I love that. Yeah. And a little side story. So Augusta, my husband, John, grew up played golf in college. And we actually, as I told you, we said, we might have to cut this podcast if dog comes running in here. Well, our dog, actually, she's in the other room, but she might be sniffing under the door there. Her name is Magnolia Lane. So, I had to pick the Magnolia Lane backdrop. We named her after the Masters. And obviously, that was, kind of a fun little thing. She's a yellow lab. And so she kind of has that magnolia look to her. And, kind of a cool way to, show our love for sports and golf. And now, Cords, I'm not good at golf. I don't know about you. I'm not very good at golf. I was once told by got a couple private lessons. And the first thing he told me is, when I was about to tee off, he said, "It looks like you're laying an egg." And I'm like, okay. So there you go. But hey, we can't win them all. I've certainly gotten better. And thankfully I have a husband that knows how to correct golf swings. And so he's like, you look the part, like you just have to get contact. And then once I get going, I'm like, all right, I'm feeling it. You get that itch once you start actually playing well.
Right. There's nothing better. Like a lot of times when I play golf, I obviously grew up playing golf. It's what you're supposed to do in Augusta when you're
right. I was going to say, I was going to ask you if you play golf, but then I was kind of like, well, what if he basically does like
just assume it. Yeah. You should assume anybody from Augusta plays golf. We have, just like when you play golf, like there's that one or two hits, even if you're mediocre, where you just struck it perfectly and it just feels so good. And it just makes you want to play again, even if it's only a couple shots.
And then you hear the contact. Watch it sing. Watch it go. I love it. Yes.
That's awesome. So anyhow, let's talk a little bit about your career. So you obviously grew up in a sports-oriented family, got a ton of support from your parents, helping, getting you to and from practice and being a gymnast and all of that. How important has that preparation and being an athlete helped you in your career?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. I think there's so much that goes with that. Because I think there are things that we are kind of molded into, throughout time, and, being a young gymnast. And believe it or not, I actually, again, I'm sitting down right now. I'm actually 5'9". So people are always shocked by that when I stand up and they're like, whoa, you were a college
I was
gymnast.
wondering the same thing. How are you a gymnast?
Yeah, people are like, nah, that doesn't make sense. And I'm like, no, true story. Like I'm a gymnast. So, but yeah, so I would say a lot of those things were definitely beneficial. Just the time management. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, I try to cram way too much into my day. So sometimes time management is something, it's an ongoing effort, right? Making sure that I don't try to do too much in a day's time, but, sometimes it happens. But just, kind of the dedication and just sort of the push. And right, when you set a goal, like, I want this thing, I'm going to keep pushing forward. And I think really that sort of resilience and that steadfast mindset and just that consistency and that grind, and, really just some of those key characteristics that were a big part of that commitment that you have when you're an athlete, especially at the collegiate level, or that was obviously the dream and the goal, and eventually landing on that. I commuted over an hour each way to gymnastics practice every day. And believe it or not, what's crazy about that is I get motion sickness, like, which is hard to believe as a gymnast. Like, oh, you get motion sick, you can flip around and twist around, no problem. But you get me in the car and I'm just like, woo, But with that being said, I couldn't even do homework in the car. So my productivity from when I left school, get in the car, go to gymnastics, do 4 hours of gymnastics practice, get back in the car, drive over an hour back home. And then, okay, by the way, you can start your homework and it's 10 o'clock at night and you got to hit the reset button and do it all over again. So, that was always kind of a challenge. But again, those are the things that kind of force you into a routine and force you into navigating some of those challenges, and really just that dedication. And I think for me, that has prepared me, because preparation is such a big part of what I do. I equate what I do, especially we'll use college football as an example, because obviously that's the kind of the peak of my season with ESPN and with my coverage there. And, essentially with the preparation, I say it's like studying. Imagine studying for a final exam once a week. Brand new information every single week. You get these two teams that you're talking about, and you got to compile it all, do all the interviews, talk to the coaches, get all the information, learn about each team, break down film. You're studying for a final exam every week. And then, oh, by the way, Saturday gets here. That's like the cakewalk. That's the easy part. Like, oh, cool. Okay. Go out on the field. You do that. You have to get there a few hours before kickoff, game, 3.5 hours. What? Interview, out. Okay. Ball it up in the trash. Whoop, throw it out. We out. See ya. And then you start all over again, right? So that's kind of the process. And, you do get lucky if you have repeat teams in a season, because there's some things that obviously are repetitive in that, or you've already learned about a team. But we all know that a lot of things change, injuries happen, players are in and out, depth chart changes. So all that to say, preparation is so key. And I think that's probably what I've really, just preparing, always being prepared, and just learning as much as I can, soaking things up like a sponge. And lastly, asking questions. I think that I've learned to ask a lot of questions in my lifetime. I'm not afraid to ask questions, even if it's something, and I encourage this to anybody that's listening, that is in this industry, or whatever clients of yours that are listening, or people that are interested in this podcast. Asking questions is so important. It's one way that we learn to grow. And I think people are oftentimes afraid to ask questions because they're afraid that it might make them look uneducated about a particular topic, or they don't know what they're talking about, right? Well, let's be real. Like, I never played a down of football in my entire life, Cord. It's like, okay, so I'm not going to pretend that I did. So if I don't know about a particular play call, or I don't know a specific part of the sport, I'm not going to pretend that I know it. So sometimes, even if I'm sitting down having a conversation, and maybe you mentioned something specific, like, oh, last week we really tried this new thing with the mesh point and this and this and this and this. And I'm just sitting here like, what in the world does that mean? I'll sometimes jot a little note at the top of my notes as a coach is talking. And instead of getting him to divulge what that means, let me save his time. Okay, let me go talk to my analyst over here who played football for many years, played in the NFL, and ask him, hey, what did he mean by this? And I'm not afraid to ask, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to pretend to know something. I would much rather ask and get it right when the broadcast comes, when I'm on TV in front of 2 million people,
Right.
versus not asking and making that mistake and sounding really silly. So asking questions is so important. And I think that's probably one of the key characteristics that I've developed over the years. Sometimes good, as an interviewer, I get to interview and ask a lot of questions. And then sometimes, I joke about this a lot, my poor husband, when we're on the golf course, speaking of the golf course, I like to ask questions. He hacks it over into the bunker or sends it into the trees. And I'm like, John, why did you send it over there? Why are you in the bunker? Why are you, why was that such a terrible putt? And he's like, And I said, why are you in a bad mood, John? Well, I wonder, because you keep asking me a lot of questions. And now I can't go out here and play my game. And now my confidence is down. And, so all that to say, you have to learn your boundaries with the questions, but ask questions. I think it's important, because you can ask questions, you can learn, and that will come full circle when we talk about, I guess, my story here, and why and how you can better get to know people and maybe learn more about them, and certainly, maybe be able to support them in some way that you never thought you could, because you might have not known their story or made a piece of their story that maybe you can relate to that could potentially help them.
Well said. One of the things that I really love about sports, and believe it or not, I was actually a collegiate football player. I'm also 5'9", so
very cool. Yes.
But I was a place kicker, and so my job was to, obviously, I only got one play, every so many plays to get out there, and a lot was on the line every time I went. So it was really a crucible and a crunch time to have to jump out there and put yourself out there when I did what my role was. And you actually described it very, very well. One of the things that I learned from that experience, because obviously, you play at lower levels and then you go up, and then at the collegiate level, it's kind of like pro light. A lot of times the coaches that are in the collegiate level, they've been professional coaches. They kind of go up and down, but those processes that you deal with and that you implement on a weekly basis, you have to put it all behind you. You have to do that next thing. You have to move on. And what I love about sports is that you get so many opportunities to work through adversity. We're all going to encounter it, whether it's in our career, in our life, in sports. And it's like the gym for adversity. You get the reps in, right? And to learn how to get on to the next play and to get on to the next day. And so I think that's an excellent segue into your story. You were a collegiate athlete at Rutgers, and then one day you got a really terrible, tragic phone call from your dad.
Yeah. Great segue. Hey, that's the journalist in you, right? That's how you do things. You segue into things. And I appreciate this opportunity to share my story as we kind of dig a little deeper, because it is part of who I am. It is what has molded me into who I am today. And so as a freshman at Rutgers, as we talked about, I was living out my dream. I was a gymnast. I was excited. I was doing the pre-med at this point, and just excited about the journey and the road ahead. And, life was kind of going as scripted. And this was my second semester, and I was studying for some exams. I called my parents, like I always did. I'm not ashamed to admit it. My parents tucked me in every single night until the day I left for college. And we just had a close relationship. They were always there, always supportive, lifting me up and lifting my brother up in our successes, obviously, and helping us, navigate the challenges that this world has to offer. And, I communicate with my parents on a regular basis. We talked every single day. So I picked up the phone, talked to my parents. We had a great conversation, talk about gymnastics practice, life in general, and, hung up the phone, and everything seemed normal. And then I got the call that night, and it was my father that was letting me know that my mom died. And I was just very shocked, because again, I just talked to my parents just a few hours before. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed okay. And, I get this phone call, and I just can't quite understand, what happened? Dad, please explain to me what happened. And unfortunately, he couldn't explain. And he said, Lauren, I just need you to get on a plane and I'll be at the airport to pick you up. And so frantically packed my bags. All these things are racing through my head, all these thoughts, trying to figure out what in the world happened. And, I just had to find my way home, right? I had to get on that plane and just get home. And all I wanted to do was run and jump in my dad's arms. I just wanted him to tell me everything was going to be okay. And I landed there in Roanoke, Virginia, where I'm from. So obviously a couple hour flight from New Jersey. And I got my bags, got off the plane, went through the terminal. And I mean, as I tell the story, every time I tell this story, I can still see the terminal, literally can feel my feet running through that terminal, running outside, looking everywhere, looking for my father to pull up. Very small airport, not hard to miss people when they pull up to get you. And instead it was my uncle and my cousin. And as they pull up, my mind is racing and I'm just thinking, you know what? My dad's probably taking care of things. I know it's been a hectic, stressful morning. He's got to get everything squared away with my mom. And, I'm going to see him soon, right? I'm going to see him soon. And that was just the thought I had. And we get in the car and we start driving. And I finally worked up the courage. And I said to my Uncle Mike, Uncle Mike, where's my dad? And he had to pull the car over in that moment. And he turned around and looked at me and he said, Lauren, I'm sorry, but your dad's passed away too. And I was just like, what? And I was just so shocked. I was just in disbelief. I couldn't believe it. Like, this can't be real. And that really became the beginning of my new reality. I was 18 years old and now having to figure out what the next steps in my life were without my two best friends and the two people that I love the most.
Sure. That is, that to me was just so heavy to learn about your particular story, just trying to put myself in your shoes and what that must have felt like. Because, when I think back to when I was 18 years old, I had the whole world figured out. I already knew what life was all about. It was just like you're kind of on top of the world, right? You're off to school somewhere, and you're an adult, at that point, and just to think like how tragic that could be, to have that's a shock to have happen. And then obviously you have a brother that you had to, obviously, is he older than you? Is your brother older?
Yeah, my brother's 2.5 years older than me. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And he was in the military at the time. And so he had to learn about it and just to see your world completely flipped upside down like that. Because even as an 18-year-old, quote unquote, adult, to me, that's still a kid, in a lot of ways. You rely on your parents quite a lot. I call my dad almost every single day still. And I just was thinking about what would that even be like if he wasn't there to answer the phone, and then you're having to deal with that as an 18-year-old and come to grips with it. And then you even mentioned that it took you years to even learn completely what actually happened.
Yeah. I think for me, when everything happened, it happened so quickly and there were a lot of decisions to be made. I had to make funeral arrangements. I had to figure out how I was going to pay for it. We had a lot of debts within the family and how those were going to get paid off, and my parents' belongings, and all these things are happening. And of course, I wanted immediate answers, but through the investigation, the toxicology reports, everything else, it would actually be 90 days before that even happened. And basically, my aunt and I drove over to the coroner's office to pick up the reports. And she walked out and said, "Do you want to read these?" And I said, "Nope," and threw them in the floorboard, and never looked at them until 10 years later. And so for me, it was a lot easier to compress what had happened to my parents And it was easier to deny, look away, turn away,
Sure.
because I knew something was off, right?
What were you scared of? What were you scared you were going to read in those reports or find out?
You know, in my heart and in my mind, I knew that they were struggling. They were going to a pain management doctor, and they were being prescribed multiple opiate drugs to help them cope with their pain. Oxycontin and fentanyl were two of their primary drugs. And, I think there was in the back of my mind that fear that maybe they intentionally took their lives, or what that investigation was going to reveal, because I knew my parents better than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing in that report. There's nothing on this piece of paper that's going to tell me something more than I know of my parents.
Right.
And that's what I justified in my mind. I don't need to read that. I know my parents. I know what they stood for. I knew they were loving parents. They were loved by so many. That's not them. And so it was easier to just deny and walk away from than to read and to acknowledge. So then I just tell this sugar-coated story when people would ask me, what happened to your parents? Well, my mom died of respiratory failure. Okay. My dad died of a heart attack. Okay. So the justification for that was, well, yeah, my mom died of respiratory failure, but that sounds a lot better than overdose.
Right.
My dad died of a heart attack. Well, yes, his heart stopped because he had respiratory failure, because he ingested a lethal amount of fentanyl. That's how I, in my mind, was able to concoct this entire story. So much so that when I would envision what happened that night, I was not there, but I would have this envision of what happened to them, and the chain of events that happened that night, that I had created this whole story in my head, and this canvas of things, chain of events that ended up not being truthful, because it was easier to say that, because I felt the judgment was less severe, less harsh. Oh, people would, okay, and accept it and move on. But, I think people talked, and I think people knew, but I now know people wondered. And a lot of people that wondered were the people that loved my parents the most, because they wanted some sort of peace. They wanted some sort of closure. What happened? How did this happen? Why did this happen? And while I know we might not ever have the answers to that, why did this happen? How did this happen to two people that seemed to have it all together, seemed on the outside to be so loving and just wonderful people. But I think that when I finally had the courage to share their story, instead of the fear of being judged, is what I thought was going to happen. But instead it was embrace. It was more love. It was an outpouring of support, and people saying, thank you for sharing. Thank you for giving me that closure that I needed to put this aside and put this to rest. And while I wish we could have known and done something to help your parents, I'm just glad that I know, and your parents were wonderful people, and we loved them so dearly. And this doesn't change anything about them that we felt for them when they were still here living on this earth.
Yeah. I mean, it's really unfortunate, because what happened to your parents obviously was a big problem. And, as humans, we're looking for ways to connect with others. And it's interesting to me, because a lot of times, my own personal experiences, some of the things that are like the toughest that you're dealing with internally, it's amazing, because when you start to share some of that, all of a sudden, like, you learn, like, oh my God, those people have gone through something very similar, or like people can relate. And it is very tragic. And I say tragic because it's like a car accident. There's really nothing that, like, you could have done, right? Or like other people around, like so many people, like you're saying, like, knew your parents and cared about your parents, and were probably close to your parents. And it seems like no one really knew what was happening, and how they were getting more embroiled and addicted to those things. And so I think your message of identifying that stigma, and what you talk about as a public speaker is really, really important and really powerful, because there's so many people out there that aren't saying anything, and you're helping them learn that they can seek help and help others.
Yeah. And I think that's, coming full circle, what I encourage others in this process. You are going to be faced with so many challenges and things that are shameful and that society deems as wrong or a poor choice or inadequate or, whatever it may be. But I think it's so important that we use our stories, our experiences, our lived experiences to inform, to bring awareness, and to help other people. And I think that's really what I've learned in this process. And I'm just so thankful that now I've been able to use their story, and it's not all in vain. I feel my parents' presence with me every single day. And now when I go step foot on that football field, I think to myself, you know what? If I can just help someone else with a story that I bring to light today, if I give someone some encouragement, something that makes them feel validated or whatever it may be, I feel like it's an amazing thing. And I'm just thankful for what that has brought to me. And I've been able to emerge from that shame. And it's a process, and everyone heals differently. Everyone takes their own time to heal from something, but I'm grateful for the ability to now use my voice and my platform to be a voice for others and to be an advocate and an adversary for other people.
Lauren, so for those of us who have our own stories, I mean, obviously it sounds like you were already a professional broadcaster when you really started getting into this platform, using your platform to help share your story. And so in some ways that may have lowered some of the friction in order to take that first step. But you mentioned what it was like the first time you shared your story in public. How did you take that experience? Like, what was that like? Putting yourself out there like that? And then also, what was that moment when you decided to now amplify it and then turn it into a passion project for yourself? And how might other of us do the same if we have stories?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think the one thing, and I was very fortunate to have a lot of love and support. So when my parents passed away, my Auntie Linda, my uncle Mike, my mom's sister, Auntie Linda, I call her, they kind of really stepped up to the plate and just the tough love. Hey, you got to make decisions here. You got to go back to school. You got to put all these pieces in place. You got to take the first step. And so there was a lot of encouragement, a lot of tough love as well, but also the realization of your parents aren't defined by how they died, but by how they lived their lives. And now I can carry on that message and that torch that they sort of leave with me and their lasting legacy. Right. And so when I realized that, and then as we talked about, when I did finally have the courage to speak up and share with people, I realized that there wasn't that downturn of judgment and that, negativity that I thought I was going to receive and that my family was going to receive. But instead it was the opposite. It was just more positive love and influence and grace and just, embrace. And so when I saw that, it was like, you know what, like the wall's got to come down. People are always going to judge. People are always going to have an opinion about something. I can't influence the opinion of others, but I can control my opinions about
Sure.
things and how I interact with people and how I, live my life. And so let's focus on that. And then I can maybe be a beacon of hope for other people through that. So, my encouragement to people, if they've got a story or they've got something they want to share, is just recognizing that your experience could be a gift to someone else, or just a small little turn of the dial to lead someone in a different direction. And, I may speak to someone and never know what the outcome is, right? I may never know what the outcome of their story is or the outcome of what direction they're headed is. But at the end of the day, one thing I can rest assured is that, if I just do my part and I speak to all of you, if you do your part, you have a piece of the story, or, just ask questions, ask people questions, get to know people on a different level, get to know your customers and your clients and, the people that are around you, get to know them more than just as acquaintances, get to know their lives, because you start to open up and unpack things about people's lives. And then you learn, oh, wow, like you went through that. You know what? I went through something similar. And then that's how conversations are started. And that's how, support systems are grown and developed. And then, sometimes you find that you might have an interaction with somebody that you now have a personal relationship with, and that can carry on as a friendship, for years to come, that, just may bless you and give you just, strength and courage and just hope for the future that maybe you didn't have before, based on circumstances that you're facing.
I think it's really incredible what you're doing with your platform and how you're using your speaking events to help others. And now that you've started doing this, what is next for you? Where do you see this going?
Well, I definitely, am thankful for that, and have had the opportunity to do some speaking events, and, I'll speak to high schools, I'll speak at corporate events, I'll speak at quarterback clubs, you name it, just kind of customizing, the message based on who I'm speaking with. And, it's something that I've just been so passionate about. When I can go speak to whether it's a group of 10, 15-year-olds at a high school, or, a full auditorium of kids, or a full auditorium of corporate leaders. It's just so fun to be able to pour into people and to provide a message. And, while it might not resonate with every single person that's sitting in that room, in some way you have a connection, and it's developing those connections, those authentic connections. And I think that's what I love about it. So, I think my goal is just to continue growing that, continue being out there in front of people, and using my voice to be a voice for others, and to encourage others, to inspire others, to motivate others. And then also working on a scholarship fund that I hope can bring awareness to the issues that we have in the communities that are impacted by addiction, and to be able to give kids, maybe young adults, students, people that feel impacted by their own circumstances at home, in their lives, give them the courage and the ability to further their education, and to say, what, I don't have to be a product of my circumstances. I lived in so much fear for many years that maybe I wouldn't be selected for things because of what happened to my parents, or that I wasn't worthy. No, what? You're worthy. Every single person is worthy of that. No matter the choices you've made, no matter the mistakes you've made, we all deserve a second chance, a third chance, a whatever chance to get things right. And eventually you will get things right, and you will find the prosperity in those things. But, you just have to step up. And I want to give people a chance to see that, and to know they are worthy of that. And so no matter what challenges are going on back at home, that they can overcome that and find their own pathway to success. And if that starts with, some financial support and furthering their education, then maybe I can be a support for them, and encouragement, and someone that, gives them at least a small, gift to move them in that direction.
That is so awesome that you're doing that. And I found a lot of information about that on your website, laurensisler.com, as well as a documentary where you talk a lot more about what you went through and how you're turning that into this educational platform that you have.
Yep. It's been fun, and kind of having that out there, and of course, social media. So I do encourage anybody that's listening, watching, you can go check out the documentary. It's only 20 minutes long. It's not super long, but it kind of gives a illustration of my story, kind of, my brother talks as well, and my aunt and my uncle and my gymnastics coach, and, some of the involvement there. And then just, it's been a fun journey, and I'm just thankful for it. And of course, I'm on social media at Lauren Sisler. So if you want to reach out and say hello, love to hear your story, would love to connect with you. everyone always jokes with me, why do you keep your DMs open? You're crazy. And I'm like, you know what? I'm a grown adult. I can siphon through the good and the bad, but I find so many relationships are developed that way. And I've just met so many great people, and it's just been a good way to connect and just, learn about people and their experiences and, just truly, wrapping my arms around people and, even in the virtual world and the social world of just letting people know that there are people out there that share similar experiences. You're not alone. And, I just want to be a support for people and let people know that there is hope and that there is a support system out there of people that love you and want to help you.
Yeah, I love that hopeful message. And we won't mention that earlier in the podcast. You said it was lucky that teams get to play another team twice. So I won't tell Dog Nation that one. And so I'll make sure not to do that. And then I really appreciate you coming on this podcast, and we wish you nothing but the best of luck with what you're trying to do with your personal passion project and your career as a broadcaster. And it's just been great to have you on the show. And thank you for teaching us a lot about what you're up to and giving us some motivation to try to do it ourselves.
Yes. And thank you, Cords. I appreciate it. Of course, always an honor to jump on, to have meaningful conversations like this. And thank you for the great work that you do to support other businesses and organizations and companies and bringing their products and obviously their services to light. So thank you so much, everyone. And have a wonderful week.
Thank you again, Lauren. And you can find all of the episodes for the Law of Relevancy podcast anywhere where podcasts are found, as well as on Bake More Pie's social media and Law of Relevancy social media. Thank you again, Lauren.